A television writer's room begins with a commitment from a studio, a network, a producer to make a television series. Obviously, this begins with funding. Obviously, this begins with an idea. Obviously, this begins with a concept for a television show. This concept comes from a writer. Generally, that writer is what we call a showrunner, an executive producer, someone who has an idea, a concept for a super cool television show. That show might be based on an idea. That show might be based on an existing property like a book. That show might be based on a motion picture property or even another old television show that someone has decided, let's turn this into a new contemporary TV show. That doesn't just happen. A writer is hired. Once again, that writer is generally a producer as well, or someone who has those kinds of skills. Why? In motion pictures, writers are hired to work on the scripts. Often many writers are hired to work on, say, a Marvel movie. I worked on Disney movies over the course of my career, and I can tell you, I was one of many writers who worked on the scripts that became movies like Tarzan or Brother Bear. In television, however, writers are central to not only crafting the script, but also creating the stories and the storylines and the arcs that will run for these seasons and run for the lifetime of a series. Finally, writers also participate in the producing or the making of the television show. So what do I mean? A writer not only comes up with an idea and writes a script. In television, unlike generally motion pictures, a writer will go to the set and participate in the casting and participate in the costume design, or rather the costume choices. The writer will participate in working with the director to make sure that the vision of the script is realized. Guess who comes up with the vision of the script in television? The writer. This is why in television, most writers either are producers, the so-called writer-producer, or most writers aspire to be producers. They have producerial skills, and they can begin as story editors, executive story editors, co-producers, and work their way up to becoming a showrunner or an executive producer. Now, a new television series generally begins with someone who is a showrunner or who has the skills to be a showrunner. Sometimes a new writer, a young writer who is just right out of school, may have a phenomenal idea for a new television series, and indeed, he or she might write that script. But inevitably, that new writer will be associated with, will be working with, a writer that has more experience and indeed showrunner skills. Now, what do I mean by showrunner? This is where the story room really becomes important. Television shows, as we all know, are not a single show. Unlike a movie, which is 90 minutes long, 2 hours long, it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, television shows are not designed this way. Television shows are episodic, at least fictional shows are. There's many different episodes in a season, whether it's 10 episodes in a season, 12 episodes in a season, 24 episodes in a season, and so on and so on and so on. Television shows are designed to run inevitably forever. So when a script is designed, it's not designed to be a final product, but rather something that lives on and on and on. And most writers, I can tell you, who create what we call a pilot or an initial television script, they hope that that script runs forever, season after season after season. They do not generally think about the end of a show, right? They generally think about the shows running for a very long time. So, who writes all these episodes? It's not one writer who sits down and writes the first episode and the second episode, hundreds and hundreds of episodes, right? That first writer that we're talking about, whether it's someone who writes the pilot and works with a showrunner, or it's a showrunner who actually writes that first pilot script, inevitably, once the show is picked up to become a series by a studio or network, that showrunner starts to think about the story room. And the first thing, or the writer's room, and the first thing that we think about in a writer's room is who are the other writers that will be in there. So, our showrunner writes a script. That script gets picked up for series. The network and/or studio commit to 24 episodes for the first season of that new show. One of the first things that showrunner, that writer-producer does is he or she hires a staff, a writing staff. I would argue it's the most important thing that showrunner will do for his or her show. We'll get to actors in a moment, but before we talk about the performance of the work, before we talk about where the shows are filmed, before we talk about lighting and costume design and all the things that go into realizing a show, let me tell you that I believe the most important aspect of a story is the story itself. Where does that story come from? The writers' rooms. Who is in these rooms? Again, the showrunner hires a group of writers to sit in that room day in and day out and do a variety of work, all leading to an ultimate script for each episode that gets produced.